I stood in the small room behind the chapel altar on base, the air thick with the scent of old pine wood, candle wax, and the stiff starch of a borrowed white dress. Outside, someone was tuning a guitar. One wrong chord rang out, then silence. Boots tapped across the wooden floor with the rhythm of a drill I knew too well. A sliver of amber light broke through the stained glass, scattering across the carpet, dust specks spinning like harmless insects. I smoothed the crease on my veil, trying to steady a heart that pounded like rotor blades winding up before a night flight. My phone buzzed. "Mom!" The screen glowed blue. For a second, I wanted to let it ring, drown it beneath the sound of music. But I'm a pilot. When the radio calls, you answer. I swiped to pick up. Madison. My mother's voice was glass, clear, polished, impossible to grip. It was the voice she used for reporters while setting down a teacup mid-interview, while fixing my father's collar before he walked into the spotlight. "No, sweetheart. No, I'm here. I'm listening." I replied automatically, like I was reading a pre-flight checklist. Fuel checked, hydraulics checked, faith in blood ties empty. "Your father is busy," she said, as if reciting the weather. "A last-minute committee meeting. He cannot risk his image today, not for your impulsive decision." Impulsive decision. The words cut like a clean blade. I stared at my hands, nails clipped short, faint stains of engine grease still on my thumb no matter how hard I scrubbed. "I understand," I said. "No, you don't." Her tone shifted, sharp, pushing me back into my designated square on the family chessboard. "Marriage to an enlisted supply sergeant will not build a future. You could postpone. Your father can arrange a proper introduction." I cut her off. "I've already chosen, Mom." Silence. Outside, I heard laughter, the crackle of a speaker warming up. Cass, my co-pilot and friend, doing a mic check. My mother exhaled, that long peppermint-scented breath I remembered from childhood, the one that always hovered above me as she adjusted my hair before society dinners. "Then don't expect us there. Your father will not sacrifice his career for your humiliation." She ended the call like a slammed door. The screen went black. My reflection stared back, eyes ringed from too many night flights, lipstick cheap and fading, a scratch at the corner of my mouth from a hard landing last week. A makeshift bride, a real pilot. I thought about the two white-ribboned chairs at the front of the chapel, reserved for my parents, just in case they changed their mind. But to me, those ribbons felt like soft nooses, tugging me back to the walnut dining table in Georgetown where every dinner was a press conference and I was the restricted question. The door cracked open. Cass peeked in, a blonde strand loose from her bun. "Hey, Captain, you good?" She saw the phone in my hand and didn't ask further. Cass never asked what she already knew. She just handed me a tissue with that crooked smile of someone who's survived too many crosswind landings. "It's a good day out there," she said. "Everyone's ready." "Yeah." I slipped the phone into my worn canvas bag, pressed a hand against my chest like strapping into a cockpit. "Let's go." We walked the narrow hallway, walls lined with faded photos of soldiers whose edges curled as if ready to lift off the wall. Boots thudded, fabric rustled, low banter floated from the chapel. When the doors opened, light spilled in, warm with pine resin, and God, I swear I smelled it. Barbecue smoke drifting from the back lawn where the logistics guys had already fired up grills for later. Alex stood at the altar. The suit fit, but his posture gave him away as a man built to carry crates, not pose. He turned as I entered, smile tugging at a scar on his cheek, the kind you earn unloading containers. In that smile, there was one thing I'd never found in my family: safety. The guitar strummed a Carolina folk tune, Cass's favorite during standby. My unit lined the aisle, hands still smudged with oil, medals crooked, shirts wrinkled. Not perfect, but mine. Then my eyes caught the front row, two white ribbon chairs, empty, except someone was sitting there. A man in his 50s, hair silver-cut, tweed jacket worn at the elbows, no tie, no badge, hands resting calm on his knees. He looked up, met my gaze, and nodded. His eyes, reed green, achingly familiar, yet softer than the steel gaze my father always turned on me. This was a harbor light. I tightened my grip on the wildflower bouquet one of the wives had picked from behind the supply shed. I told myself, I'll learn who he is later, not now. Now it's time to land safely into my own life. The chaplain, a former paratrooper, spoke with the gravel of someone who had shouted over rotors. Simple vows, like radio calls. Hold on through storm and calm, in plenty and in want, as we hold the safety line when the helicopter door swings open. Alex's hand trembled as he spoke his vow. Madison, he said, my name clear, steady like code sent on the right frequency. I don't have family sitting in the front row. I have friends, a cranky commander, endless duty shifts, and you. I won't promise wealth. I promise to make better barbecue sauce than last time and to always check your harness before you fly. Laughter rippled down the aisle. I laughed too because I could see it, him crouched in the dark, tugging my straps before a training flight. I looked at the two white chairs and the man in tweed nodded once. I wasn't empty. The rings slid on rough fingers, silver against calloused skin. The chaplain pronounced us. Cass strummed a playful riff, and my unit erupted, applause crashing like waves against a fuselage. In that embrace, I smelled Alex's soap, the dust of sunlight pouring through the back door, and realized the sky wasn't the only home I longed for. Ground could be solid, too. Outside on the lawn, folding tables with red check cloths waited, beers cracked open, smoke curled through pine branches. A sergeant's daughter darted past in a cap too big, chasing soap bubbles. I memorized it all, the snap of a beer tab, the sun lowering behind the flagpole so I could carry it when nights grew too silent. Then my phone buzzed again. Eleanor Grant, I let it ring. 1, 2, 3, then silence. A message popped, who did you send the invitation to? Another, the photo on Twitter, what are you trying to do? I frowned, Twitter I hadn't posted. Seconds later, texts from Claire, delete it now, are you insane? Then my father's name flashed, Dad. I glanced across the lawn. The man in tweed sat at a table, sipping iced tea, the sun dusting his hair gold. He lifted an old film camera, clicked once. Want a picture? I asked Alex. Right now, I asked Cass, even my commander, to join. Then I turned to the man. Closer, I saw the laugh lines at his eyes, etched from joy, not frowns. Would you take it for us, sir? He rose, dipped his head slightly, as if he'd waited years. Of course, Madison. His voice carried a Midwest softness, a rhythm that knew the wind. He knew my name. We gathered, shoulders brushing, laughter humming. He lifted the camera. No judgment, just witness. Click. The photo wasn't developed yet, but I already knew it marked the line between two worlds. On this side, sky and lawn, sweat and laughter. On the other, stained glass and empty chairs. Beautiful, isn't it? He asked, showing me the screen. Beautiful, I answered, the words smooth as a chopper breaking free from a tailwind. I hadn't sent the photo yet, but inside, I already carried the calm of a pilot who'd charted her course and accepted the wind. The sun dipped lower, silver ring cool on my finger. Alex touched my hand. Want to head inside? We're good here, I said. Here meant with my people, amid smoke and song, with a stranger whose eyes felt like home and the memory of two white chairs that no longer owned me. Far above, a black hawk thundered across twilight. Its rotor beat steady, a reminder I was still me, even when my family refused to see it. This time, I let the phone lie quiet. Some calls only drag you back to the runway you've already left. I'd taken off. I still remember the moment the chapel doors closed behind me, sunlight spilling across the lawn, laughter erupting from my friends like a wave crashing free. I had never seen a wedding so chaotic, so imperfect. and yet so warm. No brass band, no grand piano, just Cass strumming her old guitar and the roar of men and women whose faces had once been streaked with desert dust beside me in Iraq, who had curled up under foil blankets beneath the belly of a black hawk waiting for orders. That was the only audience I ever needed. Alex tugged my hand toward the back lawn, where folding tables covered in red check cloth stood in crooked rows. The logistics guys had already lit charcoal grills, smoke rising heavy with the scent of meat and rookie cigarettes. Jackson's youngest boy tore across the grass with a balloon tied to fishing line, shouting, "Captain's married! Captain's married!" The cry cracked something open in me. I laughed, loud and unguarded, like shedding the weight of years in a single breath. A beer tab snapped open with a TCHHH, foam spraying over a pressed shirt. Someone wheeled out a battered speaker, country music spilling into the Carolina night, Willie Nelson blending with crickets. A few of the girls from aviation kicked off their heels, dancing barefoot in the grass, hollering lyrics no one quite remembered. I looked at Alex. He shrugged. "Now this is a real wedding, Mads." I nodded. He was right. This was real. But even in the noise, I felt a stillness. At a table near the pines sat the man in tweed, glass of iced tea in hand, posture calm as though he belonged at a book fair in Virginia, not in the middle of my rowdy, smoke-choked reception. And yet the space seemed to bend for him, as if everyone instinctively gave him room. Every now and then his eyes lifted to me and Alex, a half-smile flickering, carrying something deeper. His eyes reed green like my father's, but without the bite, softer like autumn water. A heavy hand landed on my shoulder. Lieutenant Colonel Harris, my towering, voice still gravel from years over rotor blades. His eyes, though, carried the spark of a permanent inside joke. "Grant," he barked, "this wedding's not Army standard yet. Haven't seen anybody drunk under the table." The crowd roared. He filled a plastic cup, raised it high. "To the bride, who once dragged this old carcass out of Kandahar's landing zone, and to the groom, who knew how to hide a chocolate ration at the bottom of his pack." The cheer that followed shook the trees. My face burned, memory flashing, Kandahar rotors kicking dust, Harris bleeding from a shoulder torn open by shrapnel. I was fighting the stick, yelling into the radio. Alex, still just logistics, sprinting through tracer fire, yanking Harris aboard, pressing his own shirt into the wound. Harris lived. Alex carried a scar down his arm that he never hid. I lifted my cup. "To those still standing with us," I said, voice trembling but steady. "And to those who couldn't make it to the ceremony but carved their names into our hearts forever." Silence fell like a salute. Then someone barked, "Who?" and the whole lawn thundered in answer. Later, as the noise mellowed, I pulled Alex aside under a string of lights hung between two pines. "Do you see him?" I asked. "See who?" "The man in tweed. He's been sitting alone all night." Alex followed my gaze. The man was crouched by Jackson's boy, helping retie the balloon string with patient hands. "Yes, I see him. You know him." I shook my head. "He called me by name, Madison, before we took that photo." Alex frowned. "Old colleague of your dad's, maybe." I laughed without humor. "If that were true, he wouldn't be here." My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Mom. I let it ring until silence. Then Dad, then Claire, one after another like alarm sirens. I pressed mute, sliding it away. Alex's hand found my shoulder, warm, steady, the same way he'd always checked my harness before takeoff. "It's okay," he said. "Tonight is ours." I nodded, but inside I knew those calls weren't made out of love. They were echoes of a secret my family feared would finally surface. The night deepened. Cass moved to the center, strumming the first chords of Take Me Home, Country Roads. Voices rose ragged, off-key, hoarse with beer, but so alive that my chest shook with laughter and tears. Alex wrapped an arm around me, leaned close. "Welcome home, Captain." I leaned into him, eyes lifted to the star-studded black sky. Somewhere above, a black hawk thundered in training, rotors pulsing steady like a giant heartbeat. And near the pines, the man in tweed stood at last, leaving behind his glass of tea half full, walking into shadow. I knew soon enough I would have to face him, but not tonight. Tonight, I just wanted to be Alex's bride, surrounded by comrades, wrapped in song and the freedom I had chosen for myself. Night fell fast over North Carolina. Strings of lights hung along the lawn, glowing like fireflies, making everything shimmer more beautifully than the charity galas my father used to drag us to in D.C. Except here the soundtrack was Cass's lazy guitar, the smoke of barbecue, and the hiss of beer cans cracking open. I stood in the middle of it all, wedding dress already stained with a splash of sauce, and no one cared. Private Miller raised his phone. "Captain, picture time. This is the real flight crew." I laughed, tugged Alex close, but my eyes flicked again to the table by the pines. The man in tweed still sat there, patient, as if the whole party was just a long intermission before his turn. I drew a deep breath. Maybe it was the beer, maybe the courage combat had drilled into me. I walked over. "Would you take a photo for us?" He rose. Up close, I saw the crow's feet at his eyes were gentle, not sharp like my father's. "Of course, Madison," he said, voice steady, kind. My chest tightened, he knew my name. But I only smiled, didn't ask. We crowded together, me, Alex, Cass, Harris, and a half-dozen others. He lifted a worn film camera, clicked the shutter with the ease of a man who'd framed thousands of shots of soldiers before. Then he handed it to me. The small digital screen blinked alive. Alex and I in the center, Harris mid-laugh, Cass holding her guitar like a weapon, the string lights blazing behind us. Real, unstaged, exactly us. I saved it on my phone. Without thinking, I opened the family group chat, the one usually clogged with Claire's brunch photos and links to puff pieces about my father. I didn't type a word. I just sent the photo. 1 minute, 2, 3. I set the phone down on the picnic table, clinked a plastic beer cup with Cass. Then the screen lit up. Eleanor Grant calling. I let it ring. It stopped. Then Charles Grant calling. I gave a bitter laugh, looked at Alex. He shrugged. "Turn it off." But it buzzed again. Claire Grant. Then the texts poured in. "Claire, have you lost your mind? Mom, delete that photo immediately. Dad, you don't understand what you've just done." The words glared up at me cold and hard. No congratulations. No, you look beautiful. Only fear. I opened Mom's message. "Who gave you permission to invite him? Do you have any idea who that man is? If anyone recognizes him, your father's career will be destroyed." The phone shook in my grip. A memory flashed me at 10 years old, flipping through a dusty album in the attic, finding a photo of my father laughing with a man who looked almost identical. I ran to show Mom. Her face drained of color. She ripped the photo in half, tossed it in the trash. We never speak of him. Now I knew. The man in tweed, their forbidden ghost, had stepped back into daylight, and one single photo had sent my family into full-scale panic. The phone buzzed again, this time relentless. Like an air raid siren, I smiled, placed it into Alex's hand. "Turn it off." He held the button until the screen went black. Silence. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, looking around, friends still singing, barbecue smoke drifting, a sergeant's kid chasing soap bubbles in a cap too big. This world was real. The other, the polished one my parents worshipped, was just a mask. Alex squeezed my hand. "We're alive right now," he whispered. "Yes," I said, and for the first time, the sound of my family's calls didn't terrify me. At the pine table, the man in tweed had returned to his seat, eyes fixed on me, solemn. I knew soon I'd have to face him and the secret he carried. But not tonight. Tonight I wanted to laugh, to hold Alex's hand, to belt out country roads with Cass until my throat cracked. The photo was sent. No way to take it back. And it had already cracked open everything my family tried to bury. I thought, This is only the beginning. That night, after the last guests drifted away and only the fairy lights still flickered over the lawn, I sat alone on the chapel steps. Alex was helping clean up, Cass whistling as she slid her guitar into its case. My phone lay dark in my hand, blank as a pond no one dared throw another stone into. A night breeze carried damp pine and the ash of spent charcoal, grounding me here. Yet deep inside, an invisible wire pulled me backward, toward an old house in Georgetown, crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, and voices soft as knives. As a child, I thought our house was a museum of silence. Everything gleamed so much you could see your reflection in the banister, the dining table, even the stainless sink. Cleanliness is respect, my mother would say. But she wasn't scrubbing dust. She was scrubbing away flaws, emotions, any trace that might tarnish the family image. My father called it discipline. His rules weren't written, but we all knew them. Sit straight, don't interrupt, smile at the right time, never argue at dinner if guests were present. If asked a difficult question, smile vaguely, pivot to sports or art. Claire learned those rules like children learn jump rope, easy, graceful, never tripping. I always heard the rope sting my shins. I was 9 when I first noticed the difference. At school, I drew a helicopter soaring over a golden field. I didn't yet know the name Black Hawk, only that the spinning blades were beautiful. My teacher pinned it on the board, the class clapped. That night I ran into Dad's study, picture in hand. He looked up from his paper, glanced at my crayon lines spilling past the frame. "Cute," he said, like praising the neighbor's dog. Then he folded his paper, pointed at the edge. "See, Madison, in art, know your frame. Don't color outside. People will think you lack restraint." Mother at the door smiled softly. "Tomorrow, ballet, you'll learn control." I hugged the drawing tight, realizing for the first time that in this house, beauty had to march in line. Dinners at the Chevy Chase Club felt like press rehearsals. Dad fired questions like a journalist. "Madison, what do you think of the federal defense budget?" I was 11, chalk dust still on my nose. I parroted a phrase from TV. "We should invest in people more than weapons." He smiled at his wine glass, not at me. Adorable, but naive. Guests chuckled politely. Mother touched his arm, signaling him to ease up. I learned then to silence my own heart the way one silences clinking cutlery. Claire never got those questions. She shone with earrings, cheerleading tails, compliments on her dress. Everyone laughed, the air lightened. "She understands networking," Dad said, a decree. Then to me, "Learn to listen before you debate." I tried. At 13, I joined Robotics Club. We built a small bot that followed black tape on white floor. On test night, it ran perfectly. I brought it home, proud, set it on the glass table. Dad leaned close, politicians smile. "Good, but if reporters ask why you chose engineering over arts, what will you say?" I froze. He glanced at his watch. "Remember, every choice is a message. If you don't write it, they will." I just wanted my robot to circle his feet. It tripped on the carpet edge. Mother lifted it onto hardwood. "Try on a flat surface," she murmured. She always translated objects, stories, even me, into smoother versions. One evening, Dad took me to the backyard. Jasmine hung in the air like gauze. He tapped a new fence plank. "See, Madison, one crooked nail tilts the whole fence. Men build fences, women keep nails straight." I didn't yet grasp the lesson, only admired the polished hammer in his hand. Years later, I realized he was scripting roles for my mother and for me. Straight, silent, invisible seams. The first cracks showed when I was 16. That night, Claire was named head cheerleader, small family party. I had also just learned I'd won state in physics. My teacher had called earlier, ecstatic. I opened my mouth at dinner. Dad raised his glass. "Wonderful, but tonight is Claire's night." I swallowed my words with frosting. Later, washing dishes, I asked Mom, "Why can't we celebrate both?" She dried her hands, met my eyes in the kitchen mirror. "Don't turn a peaceful night into a battlefield." I thought battlefields meant sand and smoke and radio static. But my home had been one all along, only the bullets were velvet and I had no armor. Another memory cuts through me like lightning, a rainy afternoon in the attic. I found an old photo album. Inside, my father beside a man identical to him, only softer. I ran to show Mom. She snatched it, tore it in half. "We do not speak of him." Her voice froze me more than any thunder. Since then, the head chair at our dining table seemed longer, the distance between us an uncrossable garden. At 18, I applied to Army Aviation. I didn't tell anyone until the acceptance letter arrived. I remember handing Dad the envelope. He skimmed it, laid it beside his calendar. "No future. You'll regret making yourself ordinary." Mother stood in the doorway, eyes stagnant water. "You could study international relations. You'd fit a negotiating table better than a cockpit." I heard glass crack inside my chest. For the first time, I felt like that crayon helicopter trying to fly outside the frame. So I left, signed the papers, shaved my head, pulled on a uniform, learned to tie laces in 20 seconds, to read wind, to hear in rotor rhythm whether the machine was content, learned to map a flight by starlight, to smell rain for moisture. And I found myself inside a family that never asked me to shrink. Dad skipped my commissioning. He texted, "Don't tarnish the family name." Both blessing and threat. Mom called later, whispered, "I love you." But behind her words, I heard a dinner party, clinking glasses, Claire's laughter. Her love was broadcast from another locked room. In the Army, I earned new scars. Chin split from a fall, wrist bruised by map clamps mid-flight. But they were honest wounds, easy to explain. No one asked me to smile through blood. Harris, then a captain, told me, "Grant, there are two forces that never lie, wind and gravity. Trust them." I did. I trusted forces that neither flattered nor shamed. When war clawed my skin the first time, I called home. "Dad, I just flew through a sunset like fire." He asked, "Did you schedule CNN? They want a piece on women in uniform." I said, "I'm on night rotation." He sighed. "You missed a chance to tell the family's story." I hung up, stared at blades silvered by moonlight, realizing even the sky was just backdrop to him. The years blurred into flight paths, learning desert landings, keeping calm as tracer rounds seared the hull, joking to ease a bleeding soldier's fear. I was afraid often, but never ashamed. Home visits were rehearsals. Dad bragged about campaigns, Claire about her startup. I'd mention my squadron, they nodded like at weather reports. At night I snuck into the attic, album gone, but dust still smelled of torn paper. I thought of the man in the photo, erased. Mom's warning echoed, "We do not speak of him." A red signpost on my flight map. I pinned it in my mind, a coordinate. One day I'd return. Tonight, that day was close. On the base lawn, a man in tweed drank iced tea, nodding at me like he'd waited 30 years to speak. And the photo I'd sent had set off alarms across my family. "Delete it," they demanded, which meant they were afraid. Of what? Of his gentle eyes? Of the name Grant appearing beside another Grant? The night wind rattled an emergency blanket left on a chair, flapping like a loose sail. Alex came, sat beside me, arm brushing mine. "Where are you?" he asked softly. "Georgetown, or maybe Chevy Chase, or the attic." I smiled faintly. He didn't press. Alex always left room for my story to flow. "What's for dinner tomorrow?" he asked suddenly, as if the answer could save the world. I laughed. "Whatever you cook, as long as it's not pasta sauce 3 nights in a row." He stroked his chin in mock thought. "Then we'll invite Harris, Cass, and if you want, the man in tweed." I froze, heart pounding in a new rhythm, not rotors, but a door opening inward. "Yes," I said finally. "Invite him." We rose, crossing a lawn marked with footprints and grease. I glanced at the folding chairs, remembering the 2 white ribbons in the chapel where my parents never sat. I saw clearly. All childhood I was told to sit straight, keep quiet, stay inside the frame. I tried to shrink to fit, but the frame was never mine. The sky was. And between the sky and a white chair, I would always choose flight. We turned off the lawn lights, leaving only a string of bulbs like a broken Milky Way. Alex took my hand. I thought of tomorrow, a knock on the door, a dinner with a man whose eyes mirrored my father's yet softened them. I knew the story wouldn't be pretty. If it were, it wouldn't have been ripped from the album. But at the end, maybe I'd find the missing shard of myself. I slipped the dark phone into my pocket. The night air lifted my dress. Somewhere above, a helicopter thumped through training, slow, steady. I heard it like a promise. Tomorrow I'd ask his name. Tomorrow I'd ask why. Tomorrow I'd reset the crooked nail, not to rebuild their fence, but to keep it from collapsing onto the little yard where I was planting a new life. Tonight I knew one thing: the wounds of childhood had stopped bleeding. They'd hardened into scars, and scars, caught in the right light, could still reflect stars. I once thought the hardest blow I'd ever take was on the training field, when a drill sergeant cracked me across the shoulder with his rifle stock to force my posture straight. But no physical pain ever compared to the way my father shrank me in public, reducing me to nothing in front of an audience. My teenage years were a chain of such moments. Each family event another stage, every spotlight another chance for him to remind me I was only a supporting role in the perfect play he directed. I was 14 when he took us to a dinner at the Chevy Chase Club, his favorite theater. Round tables draped in white, violins humming, guests in tuxedos and silk gowns. I wore a pale blue dress my mother had called appropriate, not too noticeable. Midway through dinner, he set his fork down, turned to me. "Madison, what do you think of U.S. China trade relations?" The clink of cutlery froze. Faces turned toward me expectant, like spectators waiting for the rookie debater to flounder. I had skimmed a couple of school articles, nothing more. My throat tightened. I think maybe we need balance, protect workers, but keep diplomacy strong. My father nodded, lips curling, but it wasn't a father's smile. It was the condescending grin of a politician savoring an easy win. "Adorable," he said, and the table chuckled. I dropped my eyes, lobster bisque suddenly tasting rotten. Claire, in her red dress, leaned toward him just loud enough for others to hear. "She's so naive, Daddy." His eyes lit with pride, like she had just scored points for his campaign. That night I learned, in our family, knowledge wasn't currency. Appearances were, and no matter how hard I worked, I was always bankrupt. At Christmas, a year later, I played a saxophone solo I'd practiced for months. My hands trembled, but I made it through without a missed note. When the last tone hung in the air, I waited for applause. My father rose, glass in hand. "Well done, but now let's hear Claire. She's been chosen to lead her school choir." The clapping drowned me out, carrying her carol over my silence. I stood in the shadows of the fireplace, a ghost in my own home. My mother knew I was crushed. She whispered as she passed, "Don't ruin the atmosphere." She was the master of keeping surfaces smooth, no matter what cracks spread beneath. When I won first place in the state science fair for a wind energy project I'd built through sleepless nights, I carried the trophy home. My father glanced, nodded. Then Claire descended the staircase in her cheerleading uniform, his eyes lit. "Now this is leadership." The trophy sagged heavy in my hands, already junk. Each slight pressed me smaller. I learned to hide achievements, stifle joy, swallow laughter. Dinner became a silent test I endured until it ended. Slowly, I turned into a shadow in my own family. The worst came at 17. A fundraising gala, reporters clustered with cameras. My father beamed as he introduced Claire as the future hope of this family, arm draped over her shoulders beneath the flash. When it was my turn, he clapped my shoulder, chuckling to the journalists. "This is Madison. She likes to play with airplanes." Laughter erupted. Lenses lowered. I wanted to scream. I don't play. I study. I want to fly. Instead, I bit my lip until it bled. One outburst I knew would be labeled a disgrace. That night I stood before the mirror, hairpins scattered on the counter, face blotched from holding back tears. I whispered a vow. One day I would take to the sky, not to win his applause, but to prove to myself who I really was. That vow came back to me now, every time my parents blew up my phone, screaming that the wedding photo would destroy his career. They weren't afraid for me. They were afraid of losing their mask. And yet, those public humiliations forged something steel inside me. On the drill field, when a sergeant roared in my face, I didn't flinch. In the cockpit, when a Black Hawk bucked under desert winds, I didn't blink. I had lived my whole youth in front of audiences, measured, mocked. This time the difference was simple. I held the controls. I chose my heading. I thought of Claire, my little sister who once whispered poison that made me small. Now she was the one texting frantically in our group chat, begging me to delete the photo. The reversal made me laugh aloud. Once she was the tool Dad wielded to crush me. Tonight that single photo turned her into the one trembling. I knew then a new chapter had begun. Those humiliations no longer weighed me down. They had become proof that I had been silenced long enough and that it was finally time to speak. I lifted my eyes to the night sky, stars lined up like formation flight. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "the truth will take off." I was 18 when I walked out of our Georgetown house into a rainstorm that lashed me like chains. The door slammed behind me with a dry metallic snap, like the full stop on a chapter I could never reopen. I didn't carry much: sneakers frayed at the seams, a canvas backpack worn thin, a handful of shirts, a notebook of aerodynamics copied from library books, and a pencil snapped in half. In my coat pocket, I tucked the paper I had just signed, an enlistment form for the Army's aviation program. My father had sneered, called it a cheap ticket to a worthless life. Rain stung my face, numbing my tongue. I walked toward Wisconsin Avenue, turned down a side street where amber streetlights shimmered on puddles like melted grease. I didn't know where I was heading, only that I could never go back. The shop windows were dim, the jewelry store locked, an art gallery hung with bruised-looking abstracts, a French bakery gone dark though the smell of butter still lingered. Then I saw a crooked wooden sign, Harbor Books, white paint peeling, but inside glowed warm and gold. I hesitated under the narrow awning, rain dripping like cold wires through the slats. The door opened without a bell. A man in his 50s appeared, close-cropped silver hair, tweed jacket frayed at the elbows. He looked at me as though I were someone he had been waiting for all along. "Come in," he said, voice low, calm. "Out here you'll rot like wet wood." The door shut and the storm receded, pushed to the back rows like an audience forced outside. The air smelled of old paper, warm wood, and coffee, air you could wrap yourself in. He handed me a dark towel. I dropped my pack beside a shelf labeled Aviation and Pilots, where rain spattered on the cover of Stick and Rudder. I mumbled an apology. He waved it off. "Hot cocoa?" he asked, the question soft as a low stare. I nodded. He disappeared into the back where an old kettle stood sentinel. When he returned, he carried a steaming mug, foam flecked with cinnamon. I wrapped my hands around it, the heat seeping into frozen fingers as if someone had reached into my chest and lit a fire. "What's your name?" he asked. "Madison," I rasped. He nodded like the name had been known to him forever. "I'm Thomas." No last name. He didn't need to say it. In the lamp's glow, I saw his eyes, reed green, the same shade that made me hate my reflection whenever I saw my father in it. Yet these eyes didn't freeze. Their lines were softened like ripples across a lake. "You look like you just fell out of a helicopter," he said with a small laugh. "What threw you into this storm?" I let out a hollow laugh. "I want to fly. He wants me to perform." My father. I didn't add senator, press dinners, white chairs at the head of the table. Thomas seemed to understand anyway because he didn't push with sharp questions. He only gestured toward the shelf. There are flight journals there. Pick one, then tell me about this wanting to fly. I pulled down a battered paperback, The Art of Flying. Its cover felt soft as cloth. I told him about the first time I saw a helicopter over Fort Belvoir, how the rotors beat like the Earth's pulse. About the model I secretly built in our shed, the one my father called cute like a puppy trick. About signing enlistment papers, promising myself I'd choose real gravity and wind over camera flashes. I talked until my cocoa was gone and the rain outside softened to a whisper on the gutters. You know what I loved most up there? He asked, leaning back against the shelves, arms folded. The silence between two rotor beats. It lasts only a breath, but you can hear it. It tells you you're in control and you're not. Freedom and humility together. You flew. I whispered, like touching a secret. Once, he said, the sky was my home. His gaze drifted past me, seeing deserts, makeshift runways, starlit skies. Then I left, voluntarily, involuntarily, depends who you ask. I hesitated. I found a photo once, in the attic, Dad standing with someone who looked exactly like him. Mom tore it up, said we never speak of him. Was that you? Thomas locked eyes with me. Silence pressed until I heard the clock tick. You didn't imagine it, he said, voice low, reverent. That man was me. The ceiling didn't split with thunder, but the air dropped, revealing a new sky above me. I gripped the chair. Then you're Charles's brother. He said the name bare without title. In that one syllable lay both years shared and years buried. I'm your uncle, Madison. Part of me wanted to cry, part wanted to laugh. Mostly I wanted to run back to the attic, tape that photo back together piece by piece. Instead I asked, trembling, why did no one ever tell me? He sighed, pulled a chair across from me. Because I didn't fit the image. Years ago, I reported a squadron commander for flying drunk. They wanted me to sign a doctored report. I refused. They called me disloyal, said I'd ruined the story. When it blew up, someone had to take the fall. I stood up. Charles called it betrayal. I called it duty. We haven't spoken since. Heat flushed my face, not anger at him, but pride laced with grief. A man with my father's eyes who had chosen integrity. They erased you from our house, I whispered. No one erases a man from the sky, he said softly, only from photos. Outside, rain thinned to mist. Thomas tilted his head, studied me. You belong to the sky, I can see it, but you also belong to yourself. Don't ever let anyone force you to fly just for their picture. You fly to live. The word struck bone. I nodded. They'll hate me more if they know I'm here. I'm not asking you to choose sides, he said with a distilled sadness. Only to know you're not alone. This light will stay on whenever you need a landing. We talked about small things then, best tape for book spines, gloves that spared calluses in winter, a faux shop 2 blocks away with broth richer than any banquet I'd ever sat through. I even laughed first time that day. When I checked the clock, it was past midnight. Rain was only a thin mist. I'll call you a cab, Thomas said. I'll go, I answered. But not back to Georgetown, to the Rock Barracks. Next week I head to Fort Rucker for flight tests. His eyes brightened a notch. Good, if you need a ride to the field at 4 a.m., I'll be there. I laughed. I'll probably need it. Before I left, he pulled from a drawer a faded ball cap, squadron logo bleached by sun. Not worth collecting, but it kept me dry once, now it's yours. I set it on my head. It fit like it had waited for me. As the cab rolled away, I lowered the window. Thank you, Uncle. The word sounded foreign, like a new note, but it resonated in my chest long after. He leaned on the doorframe, nodded. Fly safe, Mad. Through the rearview mirror, I watched him shrink into a dark comma at the end of my stormy night. Hugging my backpack, cap warm on my head, I slept for the first time in years peacefully in the back of that cab. Months later, Harbor Books became a second base for me. On leave, I'd lean against the War and Peace shelf, sipping coffee, listening to Thomas talk about the silence between rotor beats. He taught me to read deceitful clouds, to accept sky's exams as lessons, not failures. When I flunked a night navigation test, I sat on his stoop, ready to call home for shame. He handed me a star chart. "You didn't fail, the sky just tested you." I smiled, studied again, and passed. I kept him secret, not out of shame, but protection. My family's obsession with image would crush something this fragile. When commissioning day came, Dad didn't show. But in the crowd sat a tweed jacket, eyes reed green. He didn't come close, didn't lift a camera, only nodded when I saluted. Some loves had to survive in silence. Years blurred, until tonight, my wedding night. Under the pines, iced tea in hand, his calm presence anchored me. I remembered the storm at 18, the cap, his words, "Fly to live." And when I handed him my phone to take our photo, I knew I'd laid the final stone in a shelter of my own, not to protect an image, but to protect my heart. The flood of calls, the frantic texts from Mom, Dad, Claire, they were just rain on the roof. Inside, I heard the silence between rotor beats. I could control and not control. But I had chosen who belonged in my cockpit: Alex, my comrades, and Thomas. Tomorrow we'd invite him to dinner. Maybe D.C. would come pounding on our door, maybe words hammered like nails would follow. I used to tremble at that. Not now. Because I knew my landing strip, a bookshop scented with cinnamon and paper, a man in tweed who spoke slowly, and a Carolina sky humming with rotor and laughter. I touched the silver ring on my hand like I touched the old cap brim, 2 circles, 2 vows. One made in rain at 18, to fly. One made tonight, to live. As we left the lawn, light still glowing, smoke curling through the pines, I turned. He stood, lifted a hand in salute. I returned it like 2 aircraft passing in the dark, brief enough understood. Tomorrow, truth would sit at our table, and I would no longer be that drenched 18-year-old beneath the awning. I would be a woman who knew her course, knew who to keep in her cockpit, and when to open the door to the wind. The wedding night passed like lightning, bright, violent, gone too fast, leaving behind a silence people mistook for peace. But I knew better. It was only the eye of the storm, and when the eye moved, the fiercest winds would strike. The next morning, Alex and I hadn't even taken down the fairy lights still tangled across the lawn when my phone buzzed nonstop. A text from my father's office. "We need to meet immediately. No negotiation." Just that short, clipped, like an order from a commanding officer. I almost laughed. He still thought the whole world marched under his command. Alex put a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to go. It's the first day after our wedding. We should be on a beach, not in some emergency meeting with a man in a suit." I looked into his eyes, saw the shield he offered without words, but I shook my head. "I'm not running anymore. It's time." We drove into D.C. The sky was iron gray, autumn wind scraping through the trees like strings tuned too tight. As we entered my father's office tower, steel, glass, cold as a morgue, I felt like I was stepping back onto a stage where I'd once been forced to play a role I never chose. In the boardroom, my father sat at the head of the table, a leaner by his side, Claire across with a smile sharp enough to cut. No flowers, no champagne, only laptops, files, and on the big screen, the wedding photo I had sent. "What do you intend to do with this?" my father demanded, voice rough but still powerful. "That photo is just the truth," I said evenly. "I didn't add, I didn't take away." Claire barked a laugh. "Truth, a picture with a washed-up failure your family cut off years ago. You're humiliating yourself, that's all." I met her eyes, remembering all the times she had stolen our parents' pride while I stood invisible. At least he never sold his soul for an image. My mother placed her jeweled hand flat on the table, like sealing a resolution. "Madison, you don't understand the game. Politics isn't about truth or lies. It's about controlling the story. If you let Thomas back in, the entire legacy collapses." "Then it deserves to collapse," I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. The air froze. My father slammed the table, files scattering like startled birds. "You have no idea what you're destroying. I built a career, an empire, and you think a single photo, one old bookseller, can bring it down?" Alex spoke before I could. His tone was low, sharp as a blade unsheathed. "You forget Madison is a soldier. She's flown helicopters through tracer fire. You've never even sat in that seat. Don't think you can break her with shouting." My father's eyes flared red, but for the first time I saw him falter half a step back. Alina exhaled, turning toward me. "You think you'll find happiness by fighting this family? No, you're only digging your own grave." I leaned forward, slow, deliberate. "If happiness means staying silent before lies, then yes, I'll dig. But it'll be a grave for fear, not for me." Claire's chair screeched back. She stormed out, teeth clenched. I knew this wasn't over. She'd be the spear point of their counterattack, the one willing to dirty her hands where my parents wouldn't. As Alex and I left the office, I felt something I hadn't in years, lightness, like unbuckling a lead vest after a long flight. Alex squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded, though inside a siren wailed. My family had never lost a battle without striking back, and the next strike wouldn't just be words in a boardroom. After the brutal meeting in my father's office, Alex and I drove back to base. Streetlights streaked across the windshield like thin golden bars, each one a reminder that I was leaving one world behind and heading toward another. I leaned my head against the glass, replaying my father's shouts, Claire's bitter smile, my mother's silence. But when the gate of Fort Liberty rose ahead, the guards saluting, the flag snapping in the wind, I knew I was home. We decided to host a small dinner. Not a wedding reception, not a press event, just a meal for the people who truly were my family. Alex set up a table on the grass beside the old chapel. I spread a red and white checkered cloth, laid out dented steel plates, mismatched cutlery, half-used bottles of barbecue sauce left from the wedding. Harris showed up with a cooler of beer, lugging it like military gear. Cass followed, her guitar chipped and peeling. She grinned. "What's a soldier's party without music?" Thomas arrived last. He stepped out of a beat-up car, tweed jacket faded, carrying a paper bag. Inside were paperbacks and a weathered aviation atlas. "A late wedding gift," he said with a soft smile. I hugged him, and for a heartbeat I was 18 again, drenched in rain at a bookstore, finally embraced instead of erased. Dinner began with ribs sizzling on the charcoal grill. Harris took over cooking, flipping meat while telling old stories. The time he nearly got stranded in Kandahar, the week we all survived on expired rations, the Black Hawk landing in mud up to its wheels. Cass strummed a slow country riff, her rough voice glowing like campfire light. Alex sat beside me, barbecue sauce still on his fingers, but his hand warm and steady on my back, a quiet reminder, you're not alone. Amid the laughter, Thomas was quieter. He sipped iced tea, eyes moving from face to face, storing it all like pages in an unseen book. When Cass paused to retune her guitar, he finally spoke. "I once flew through a storm," he said, voice even, steady. The table fell silent. The wind was so fierce that if I fought it, the blades would have snapped. I learned to angle the rotors, to slip with the gusts, let them carry me out of the eye. Not every storm should be fought head-on. Sometimes the wisest move is simply to fly through. Then he turned to me. "You're in a storm now, Madison. Charles and Alina will never accept you. Claire was raised on envy and resentment. But you don't need to fight them. You only need to chart a different course." My throat tightened. In my mind, I saw again the two white chairs at the chapel, then the folding table glowing under these strings of lights. One side emptiness, the other life. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. "Claire, a message. You've destroyed everything. I hope you're happy." Once her words could reduce me to tears. Tonight I felt pity, not fear. I set the phone back on the table and looked at Alex. "I'm not answering." He nodded, smiling gently. "You don't have to. The evening carried on. Cass began Take Me Home, Country Roads, and the whole group sang, Harris pounding the table in rhythm until beer sloshed over. Thomas didn't sing, but I caught his fingers tapping along like recalling an old song only he still remembered. When the fire burned low, Alex pulled me aside under the pines. He brushed a streak of ash from my cheek. "You know," he whispered, "at the chapel, when you walked in with red eyes, I thought you might collapse. But then you stood tall, like you were flying a black hawk straight into a storm. I realized you're stronger than all of us combined." I leaned into him, listening to his heartbeat steady as rotor blades. "I'm strong because I have you, them, and him," I said, glancing toward Thomas. We stood there in silence, wind sifting through the trees. For the first time in years, peace wrapped around me like a blanket. When the guests left, I stayed on the grass alone. Above, a Black Hawk training flight released a flare. White fire bloomed, falling slow as a star. I looked up, remembering my father's cuts, Claire's envy, my mother's hush, the storm at 18, the phone call on my wedding morning, all of it behind me now. "Family isn't blood," I whispered. "It's the people who sit beside you through the storm. Tonight I chose the right course." I breathed deep, the smoke of dying charcoal, damp grass, the metallic tang of spent flares. Inside me, a certainty hardened, solid as rotor rhythm, steady as a flight path through turbulence. From now on, I would not live to polish anyone's image. I would live for myself, for Alex, for my comrades, and for the new family I had chosen.